Good afternoon and welcome. This podcast is part of the work of the Victorian Bicultural Workers Network, facilitated by CoHealth's Bicultural program. Through these conversations, bicultural workers share their community's experiences of mental health, well-being and accessing supports. These stories are shared to help mainstream services better understand the needs, strengths and perspectives of refugee and migrant communities, and to reflect on how they can work more effectively and safely alongside them. Before we begin, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land which this podcast is recorded, the lands of the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to elders past and present, and we acknowledge that this work takes place on land that is unceded and stolen. We recognise the enduring leadership, strength and wisdom of First Nations people in navigating, surviving and challenging colonial systems and in bridging divides to support the well-being of their communities. My name is Jasmine and I'm the Bicultural Program Lead at CoHealth. Joining me on the podcast today is Sara Mohsen. Welcome, Sara.
Hi, Jasmine. How are you?
Good, thanks. Thanks so much for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your community, your work.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you in this podcast. I'm Sara Mohsen and I'm a community capacity building practitioner and educator. I live in Melbourne. My work focuses on supporting newly arrived families, especially those impacted by conflict and displacement. As for my community, I come from Egyptian Middle Eastern background. And like many migrants, my journey is layered and shaped with migration, motherhood, education, and community work. I just want to start by saying that I'm speaking from my own experience and the conversations that I have had in my work as a bicultural worker, and that my community is incredibly diverse, culturally, politically, religiously. So there isn't one single narrative for everyone.
I really appreciate you saying that, Sara. I think that it's true for every community, the diversity that exists, and no one voice can capture all voices or perspectives shared in a single community. So recognising and stating that is so important. From your experience in working as a bicultural worker and with community, what are some of the greatest strengths that you see among those community members?
Yeah, it's something that was really clear when I came here in Australia. It's the collective resilience and the sense of responsibility towards each other. When I first came here in Australia with my family, we arrived on student visas and we were welcomed with Egyptian members here in Australia. We didn't see them before, but just because we were emailing and asking people on social media about life in Australia and so on. So they came and they welcomed us in the airport and they drove us to our Airbnb. So it was very obvious to me that the strength of the community is the strong sense of responsibility towards each other and the resilience that we have in continuing to prioritize the family connection, education, and preserving our own identity, faith, and values, especially in a foreign country. These are most of the strengths that were really obvious to me here in Australia.
Thank you for sharing that. It's so interesting having spoken now with lots of different people from different communities, that collective support and solidarity and connectedness has been such a strong theme across everybody's sharing about what is seen as a strength of community. It's really beautiful to hear.
Yeah.
This podcast, we're talking about mental health and communities' thoughts and perceptions around mental health and how they get support. What do you think is some of the ways that your community talks about mental health and well-being, and what words or concepts exist in your language to describe it?
From my own experience working in community engagement, I believe in Arabic speaking contexts, mental health is not framed in clinical language. Instead, it's in everyday language. Let me mention the Arabic words that we might use. People might speak about راحة نفسية, which means psychological comfort. Or they may say also, I feel in Arabic مخنوق, means I'm overwhelmed. So this is integrated in our everyday language, but without having this diagnostic clinical terms. Also, very common concepts in Arabic is sabr, means patience or endurance, that you carry strong spiritual, cultural meaning, that you have to endure what you've been going through. Also, tawakkul means trusting God, which usually sabr and tawakkul is the two terms that we understand in my culture, how we manage the distress that we go through. Also, another thing that came up to me lately in my work with people who have just came from war zone, that they don't talk about their emotional distress. They just talk about the physical symptoms that they have
Mm.
because of this distress. Yeah, so instead of saying depression or saying trauma or so on, they may talk about their physical symptoms that they do have and how to cure them.
That's so interesting. You're the second person who's shared that on the podcast about
Mm,
how it's more likely that a person will talk about the physical components of mental health that can be seen and
mm,
evidenced through sight or feeling, as opposed to the more abstract concepts of
mm,
emotional turmoil. So
mm.
interesting. I just want to ask, with some of those terms that you shared in language, how many of them link to spirituality or a particular faith?
What's connected to faith is sabr. Sabr means patience, and tawakkul means trusting God. Regarding my faith, it's the Islamic faith. They are really linked together, as faith can be the main source of strength, as it offers meaning, hope, structure, sense of not being alone, and practices in my religion like praying, reflection, reading Quran, listening to a religious advisor. They are all grounding techniques that we use every day. It's intertwined in our daily life to help you to build the emotional resilience.
How do communities usually seek help or support when they're struggling with their mental health? Who do they speak to first? And are there any traditional or cultural ways that your community deals with mental health?
Yeah, regarding the grounding techniques that the individual may resort to before they speak to someone, as I mentioned before, it's the faith practices like praying, reading Quran, listening to religious advisor, and so on. But what's coming very common now, that most people also turn to online spaces, social media groups or community forums, that they are of people who have been through a similar thing, like the migration experience or the loss or the war and so on. And they prefer to ask anonymously to feel safer, that they can ask without being judged, and they seek advice without being looked down to. Also, family and friends network, it comes next as a primary coping mechanism for people. And professional support is sometimes only sought if the symptoms showed up physically. So
Would
you feel
then,
that it's out of control. You need to look for a professional help now.
and do you think people are more likely to go to their GP or to a psychologist or a counselor?
Yeah, usually the GP from a similar background or
Mm.
cultural background would be the first resort. And then, according to the GP, he may refer them to a psychologist or psychiatrist. It depends on the case, of course.
And what do you think when people do enter into a service, whether it's their GP or going to a counselor or a psychologist? What are some of the challenges that people might face once they start trying to engage with a mental health support service?
It's a good question. And I believe the most challenge is to feel culturally safe. As me, myself, or anyone would hesitate if you feel that you won't be understood or you would be judged without considering your cultural norms and faiths and family structure. Also, another challenge is sometimes you don't click with the professional, or as I can say, you feel that you are spoken down from someone superior than you, that you are being corrected rather than understood. This is something that shuts you down, and you feel that I'm not going to seek any more help. from a foreign person. I am looking for a person from a similar cultural background so they would understand me without exhausting me in explaining my cultural norms and family structure. Yeah, and this is something very common that I have heard this experience from several people here that they felt that they are being corrected or they are judged, they are not understood, or they feel exhausted all the time explaining themselves or explaining the family structure without being misunderstood.
That's so interesting. And again, it's something that we're hearing a lot from different communities, just that
Mm.
when seeking support from a practitioner who doesn't have a similar cultural background or a similar lived experience, that
Mm.
that role of having to explain or not having their cultural values or beliefs respected
Mm.
and understood as being a really problematic
Yes.
point of where trust breaks down and that therapeutic relationship doesn't work. I want to ask, what do you think about the actual process of counselling or psychology and how our mental health services are delivered in Australia? Are they similar to or different to how people might access support back home?
Yeah. From my view on the mainstream services here in Australia, it's really effective and it has really useful tools. But the main and the models also are really relevant to what we need. And it's similar to what we are having back in my country. But the missing part here is the application, the gap in applying the models and whether it's delivered again within the cultural understanding or not. What's different also that back in my country, it's integrating faith and they understand the family context, they understand the cultural background, so the integration is natural. But here, because there is this gap of understanding in the culture and the faith and the family context and the family, they do have a role in taking a decision. You cannot take your decision on your own, and it doesn't mean that I'm dependent on, I'm weak, or I don't have power. No, it means that I'm part of this family and it's central in taking the decision. All of this cultural norms that we do have, it's exhausting to have access here in the mainstream, and you keep explaining and reasoning what's
Mm.
happening because of the fear that you will be judged, or you feel that this is in that you don't have the freedom in taking your own decision, or you are controlled.
Mm.
So this make the people feel restricted in sharing their own beliefs, and what's the problem, because they fear that they will be in another problem.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And it's so interesting, isn't it? And I think a lot of mainstream practitioners, they don't really understand the
Mm.
burden that places on people or the extra work that it
Mhm.
creates for individuals who are seeking help to have to explain and justify the ways in which their worldviews are created and how their family dynamics operate and their cultural beliefs and all the
Mm.
rest of it. So we're adding another layer of pressure on
Exactly.
somebody as opposed to alleviating and supporting without having to do additional work. That's so powerful. Thank you.
Yeah.
And it leads me to my next question, which is what is it that you wish mainstream organizations understood about your cultural norms or your community's perspectives to better support access and cultural safety for them in accessing services?
Mm. Yeah. I believe that they need to understand that community is not all the same, even within the one culture or religious group. We have different experiences, beliefs, educational levels. So, just to avoid assumptions when you're dealing with a specific cultural group,
Mm,
and to bear in mind that there are many differences. Another thing is understanding of family role. Family in my culture is central, and decisions are made together.
mm,
Involving the family is not weakness. It's just how you show support and care, and this is your circle of support and care. Another thing is also the that many people who arrive as migrants and refugees, they were already professionals and leaders in their own home countries. Starting again in a new country doesn't mean that they have lost their skills or knowledge.
of
So
course.
giving them this sense of dignity when you're talking to them is really important because it makes them feel valued, that you're looking to them through a strength lens.
Yeah. I hear a lot with the bicultural workers that I work with is the assumption that because a person may not have mastered the English language, there's an assumption that their intellect is not as high as somebody who has fluency in English, despite the fact that English might be their fifth or sixth language.
Exactly. Or even the accent. Sometimes, if you have this strong accent, you would feel that you are judged, that your education wasn't good enough. Also, the role of faith, that can be a really main source of strength if it's, let me say, it doesn't replace the therapy, but it's integrated respectfully and complement the therapy. It can work alongside with it, which would be really effective and makes a big sense to the client that it's meaningful to them. It's a whole framework. It's not only a tool that I'm doing or just a diagnosis that I'm labeled under.
You've talked a lot about the importance of having a shared lived experience and cultural understanding in order to create that kind of safe space that doesn't result in a person having to justify themselves or explain their culture.
Mm, mm.
Do you think that it's possible for a successful therapeutic relationship where that's not the case, where you might have a therapist or a mental health practitioner who doesn't come from a similar culture, who can hold safe spaces for people to help them on their journey?
Yeah, I believe it doesn't need to be from the similar cultural background, but just to understand, to have this cultural competency, that
Yeah,
you understand where is this person coming from, just to save the time and the energy and the effort of the client to explain themselves and the cultural norms and so on, so that the therapist is on the similar ground. So
yeah.
it doesn't need to be, no, from a similar background. It's just need to understand the culture, to have this cultural competency.
And I would say also the ability to reflect on their own cultural biases and assumptions to be able to hold space more effectively.
Exactly.
I was having a conversation with a group of bicultural workers the other day who were
Mm,
being asked to work with people from all different cultural backgrounds and feeling inadequate because they didn't understand or didn't have an in-depth knowledge
mm,
of the other cultures that they were trying to work with. And
mm.
we were unpacking and discussing how it's impossible to know everything about every culture, first of all.
Exactly.
It's about listening effectively and
Yes.
understanding how your own cultural views and beliefs are your own. And that's not the only way of thinking about the world or being in the world, and to question your biases and hold space for others to share their truth in a way that makes them feel heard and believed and understood. Everybody talks about how important it is to have that shared understanding. But I think as long as you can create a safe space where a person's not having to do that work,
Mm,
it can still have a positive outcome.
exactly. Even better, sometimes when you talk to someone from a similar background, you would have also some sensitivity in sharing something about you that you don't want to share with someone from your own country or from
Yeah,
your own. So it's even better to talk to someone from a different culture, but they understand where
yeah.
you're coming from.
Yeah, and I've spoken with others who've talked about experiences of racism and feeling, if they have a practitioner who perhaps is white, not understanding or believing
Mm,
their experiences of racism because they don't have that shared lived experience. So not necessarily having to come from the same cultural background,
exactly.
perhaps being a person of color or some level of lived experience, so that understanding and belief is shared.
Yeah, talking about being safe from the moment they walk into the service, to be the service, to be culturally aware and ask with curiosity and respect, instead of investigating. There is a way in questioning which shows curiosity, or you are just investigating what has happened just to
Mm,
tick the box. Also, having language support available and smoothly integrated in the conversation is really important. Also, seeing staff around from different cultural backgrounds make you feel as a client a bit safer, culturally safer, that it's multicultural place, so it's fine. It's not only one color there or one background which is dominating the space.
I want to focus in a little bit on bicultural workers specifically and ask what role bicultural workers playing in supporting communities' mental health and well-being and accessing support services.
In my current role and in the role that I was working before also as a bicultural worker, I believe they are very important as a bridge between the community and the service in building the trust, explaining the system in a culturally meaning way, advocating for individuals whenever it's needed. However, I believe that the services, they are putting a lot of responsibility regarding the cultural understanding and cultural competency on the bicultural worker. But the mainstream services, they should be able to build their own also cultural competency. I cannot access, for example, a service and just to see me as a person from a different background or a migrant. I'm calling the bicultural worker directly to deal with this person. No, you have also to work on your own competency, even if you are not from a similar cultural background. And another thing also that I believe bicultural workers need to be acknowledged and recognized formally more than that, because they are carrying already emotional labor and lived experience. So their contribution should be more valued, not so seen as informal or secondary. Just whenever the project is over, that's it. We don't need the bicultural worker in an ongoing role. What do not to have them only as a casual basis? No, they need to be integrated and to be in the role on and to sustain their own role for longer and to feel valued.
Oh, Sarah, I wish you could see me smiling and nodding as you're speaking because I agree with you 100%. And I'm so glad that you talked about how cultural safety or cultural competency needs to be an organizational wide responsibility and that it's not okay to defer everything cultural safety related to a bicultural worker. And that's such an important point. And I think what comes along with that, like you said, is recognition, remuneration, employment sustainability, so that bicultural workers can influence and support the cultural shift that needs to happen across organizations, having their expertise valued and recognized and embedded in really sustainable ways across organizations. Is there anything else that you really wanted to say that perhaps you haven't had an opportunity to say yet before we wrap up?
Honestly, I want to thank you for today, for inviting me. And also, I would like to recognize the amazing work that you've been doing. It's 3 years since I've been part of the Bicultural Worker Network, and how it has really helped me in finding my current job and to feel also connected to other bicultural workers from different cultures who share the same vision with me and the same challenges, the same aspirations. I found it always valuable to attend all of your network events and to follow up all of your emails. It's really gave me this sense of belonging professionally. And yes, please keep do what you're doing.
Thanks so much, Sarah. It's always so wonderful connecting with you and having you at our network events. And thank you so much for
Thank you.
your time in doing the podcast and just sharing your wisdom and expertise with us. It's been so wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Justin. Thank you.